Hi, so I guess we are starting now. And yeah, hi, I'm Lester from P2P. P2P is also a staking validator running in a couple good networks, but at the same time, I'm the moderator here and very happy to be here. Hash Lounge always has like a special place in my heart, and thank you so much for having me here. And I do mean it. But without further ado, let's introduce our speakers.
Yeah, hi, I'm Izzy, Master of Validators at Lido.
Hi, my name is John. I run a small validator company called A41. Just like how Lester said, you're running a couple of networks. We're a small validator in Korea.
Everyone's running a couple of networks, but then A41 and small, these two words definitely do not relate to me. But yeah, so today we are going to be talking about DVT and with different projects like Lido or and a relationship with validators as well. So we wanted to just kind of like dive into this concept. Not sure if everyone know about DVT right now, but I guess I just kind of drop into it. It's basically sharding the keys of the validator keys just to give you more security. And obviously there are a couple projects that are doing the same thing with the same technology. But just wanted to understand or curious about what would be the incentives for like both for projects and validator to run on DVT. I guess we could start with Lido.
Yeah, sure. So DVT kind of aims to solve a couple of complexities from the side of running a validator. So on the one hand, it's operational complexity. If you think that you running the validator at your home might be susceptible to certain things like power outages or, I don't know, you don't have good bandwidth, it might be easier to co-run the validator together with some friends that have like better internet. And so if you split the validator this way, and Will uses this great analogy that it's kind of like running a validator with a multi-sig, you basically immunize the validator itself against small operational hiccups, like one person out of, well, 1 out of 4, for example, being offline. So that's the one thing that DVT is really, really great about doing. The other great thing about DVT is that it's harder for operational errors on the side of one operator to affect the whole validator. So the only cause, I think, right now of slashings on mainnet is human error. So it's basically somebody having ended up running the same key in the same place twice. Either by mistake or on purpose because they had like a backup or a failover strategy that there was a bug in the design of, so to speak. So if one participant in DVT does this, the validator will not get slashed. You actually need the threshold, at least a threshold quorum amount of people doing the same thing for that to be a slashable offense. The downside is that sometimes people think they're clever and will run the same DVT validator twice in order to have like better uptime and then don't tell the other participants about it. And then if everybody's doing it, you will get slashed, so please don't do that. Or if you're doing it, make sure that you're announcing that you're doing it. And so those are the two main ways. So I guess reducing kind of like technical and operational risk, and also to a certain extent making operating a validator more approachable, right? So it's a very daunting task if you're thinking of running a validator on your own, but if you're running it with friends, it might be much more approachable.
From like operator's perspective, I think DVT kind of like has goods and bads. I would say I would start with bads first. Yes, it does help or contribute to the decentralization of ethos of networks that we participate, and especially when we talk about DVT, we are usually like dealing with ETH. So I say like yes, it does help like decentralization, and like operators who are participating in DVT have pride or like at least like have a confidence that we are taking part of the bigger like picture. But the bads has to do with the margin basically. I have to talk about it because like when outside of the staking realm or the stakers realm or operators realm, when I remember the time when Lido was getting attacked because it was above like 33% or whatever, like how the protocol is making so much money and like you guys are not going like putting back to like ETH ecosystem and yada yada. Same goes to like a lot of the larger validators as well. We are often like targeted and criticized for like hey, you guys are doing but basically nothing but like feeding off of like eco or the networks, but the margin that we get is actually very slim. Whereas like for the security and the decentralization, like a lot of people are or when the efforts were when the interest was like centered around like decentralization, I think the DVT was like pushed really heavily, and a lot of the operators were either unwillingly or forcefully were participating in DVT testnets, so that we don't fall behind from other competitors to per se. So, but when the DVT, like, I was kind of like having a relief, like when Easy was telling us that, oh, it's the limit is right now 0.4%, it's gonna go up to 4%. Even though I saw it on documentation, I was like, whew, like it hasn't changed to like 99%, like, you know, like DVT staking, because that means that we're going to be sharing, or at least the reward and commission that we're getting off from the staking will be like cut down. So, yes, there is definitely goods. I think it's more philosophically good stuff. Whereas from operators' perspective, I think it's more real, because like as we will see more DVT, like, you know, being integrated into system, and Opal will be coming to the market soon. SSV has been into the market, and it is trying more integrations with more protocols. We will definitely be facing a future where we are going to face slim margin going slimmer. So like I'm pretty curious about like how every other stakeholder in this eco is thinking about, especially like protocol side, how you're going to deal with like professional operators basically like complaining all the time about the margin.
That's a good question. So maybe let's like break down how it actually affects margins, because I think it's non-obvious. So there's two ways that basically a node operator can participate in or use DVT. One is they can use it intra-operator, so for their own validators, right? So like, let's say you guys are running 1,000 validators, and let's say that you're running them all right now in one instance. You shouldn't run 1,000 keys on one instance, but like, let's say that that's the current paradigm. If you were going to then split these 1,000 validators currently on one client across, let's say, 4 instances of a DVT node, you would have to set up like 4 more nodes, right? And you probably shouldn't then be using the same beacon chain client and execution layer client for all 4 of those nodes. So you'll have to set up another 4 sets of pairs. And those are actually quite expensive. So now you basically have 4 times the infra cost for the same amount of validator keys, i.e. rewards that you would be getting. That's even if you're running DVT in-house. The benefits that you get, though, is that like if one pair of those nodes is down, your validator isn't totally down, so you're not missing all of those rewards. Or you can even build kind of like diversity into your own stack. So previously you might have like one pair which is just Nethermind and Prism or something, but then you might have Nethermind Prism and Geth Lighthouse and I don't know, like Besu Nimbus or something like that. However, the marginal gains from doing things like that is actually quite low. And so because the marginal gains are quite low, but the actual fixed costs of doing it are quite high, the impact on margin is huge, unless of course something really, really bad happens. And that's kind of like the difficult thing to square about DVT, is that you're incurring a much larger fixed cost initially to stave off a potential catastrophic scenario, which may never happen. And the other way that DVT can be used is across operators, so inter-operator DVT. So like A41 and P2P plus another 2 operators might be in a cluster. If you used to be running 1,000 keys each, right? But now we're saying that, hey, you guys are going to run 1,000 keys as a group. You're also making 25% less revenues on the exact same amount of validators. So usually what has to happen from a protocol perspective, if you want to think about like fairness, and because I mean, it's less about fairness, but more about running nodes being a sustainable business proposition for node operators. Because if it doesn't make business sense to run nodes, you either won't run them well or you not run them at all. And the network doesn't want that. So you would either have to allocate more validators to node operators, like per cluster, if you want to think about it that way, which will, however, unfortunately incur more fixed costs because you'll need to run more nodes to be able to run more validators. So this is the really tricky thing. I don't know if we'll be able to find the balance, but we need to poke at it a little bit and see kind of like where it's going to end up.
In my personal view, I feel like protocols like Lido implementing simple DVT more is actually like something that I'm not really too fond of. Like, I'm just saying, but I think it will make sense like in the future where, like, let's say staked ETH product, staked ETH ETF product has come out, right? And let's say it has like millions of ETH, like, you know, that is staked as a financial product. Probably go through like custody players like BitGo or Coinbase or whatever, but then they will choose like a set of node operators that are not going to be disclosed. But for that, I think DVT could be very useful instead, like not instead, but like, you know, alongside with a lot of DeFi protocols that, like Lido, we already have so many curated operators that are trying to eat off the pie together. But for newer financial products that are going to, like, you know, be injecting money into the market, I think on that sense, like, you know, DVT could be meaningful from our end, because it is really difficult to persuade institutions to stake with one single operator. I think Lester knows it like pretty well too, because like if you're trying to persuade one institution that has, let's say, 50,000 ETH to stake with you that all ETH, they get kind of like paranoid as well. Like, how are you gonna, like, you know, cover the insurance of it? And as you know, the insurance policies and insurance companies in this staked ETH economy, I'm not naming anybody, it's kind of fucked though, right? It's so skewed that the premium's so high, for us it's pretty much impossible to do it. So I think instead of, like, because we don't have that, like, you know, really good insurance programs, we would be benefiting out from facing like those institutions in a way. If I have to find a good thing about DVT, like other than the fixed cost like increase, like, which is something that we really hate, but maybe that could be the good thing that we could actually like foresee from a future where DVT is becoming quite of a norm. My question to like Easy is and Lester too, like, would there be other solutions that like we can see other than, like, you know, DVT, or that are being discussed or like being researched right now in terms of, like, you know, how to negate the centralization of staking? Because I know you guys been grilled for a long time, so.
That's a good question. So it depends on what, well, from which perspective you're thinking of centralization, right? So, like, the perspective that DVT addresses directly is that like concentration of stake with node operators. So if you spread the same stake across more node operators, you help decentralization in that capacity. If then the participants in how they run DVT use different client configurations within a cluster, then you also help centralization from a software perspective. That's something that requires a lot of coordination, and it's something that in simple DVT, like Lido contributors help with. So, you know, we get all the participants together and we're like, okay, what clients are you gonna run? What clients are you gonna run? To make sure that, for example, there isn't a critical threshold of the same client combination. And then there's also, of course, like other centralization risks, which is one protocol, for example, perhaps having like too much ETH in it in terms of like the share of other ETH. And that's largely been the argument that has been levied against Lido in the past. I think it's a good concern, it's a valid risk, but it's not enough to only think about it in terms of like, there's a certain percentage point after which things become problematic, because not all protocols are the same, right? So like, if you're thinking that it's best to spread like stake across, let's say, 5 protocols and they each have 20%, that's kind of weird, because the only thing that you're thinking of right there is like what number sounds good, and you're not thinking of like what is the risk profile of each protocol, how good is their code, how paranoid are they about security, do they go after, you know, like every DeFi opportunity that comes up and like market it on Twitter for yield and things like that. And then the last aspect, kind of like around centralization, is how open is the protocol for other people to use it, right? So the great thing about STETH is that anybody could stake at the beginning. However, not anybody could run a node. And so with CSM, anybody and everybody would be able to run a node and participate in staking on Ethereum, almost like you would as a node operator, without having to have the 32 ETH. Now, from your perspective as a node operator, you probably won't like that a little bit either, because again, you'll have to share the same size of pie with more people. I think the reality there is that like you will never be able to have, I don't know, like let's say 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 independent node operators, right? Solo stakers. And they will very, very unlikely be able to run hundreds, or like definitely not thousands of validators, right? Because there's not enough capital, and it's too capital inefficient from a bonding perspective to be able to do something like that. So the natural kind of end game is for professional node operators to be running the lion's share of the network. But increasing the participation of independent node operators drastically helps because they are like the bulwark when it comes to things like regulatory overreach, censorship resistance, and things like that. So if you can rely on a relatively fat, long tail of independent node operators for things like censorship resistance, and like the ethos of the network, then you can rely on the professional node operators to keep the network running well and functioning.
Same here. I mean, that's I think that's kind of a good conclusion of what John wanted to ask. And at the same time, I'm actually not sure about one point though, because you mentioned insurance. Just want to kind of dig deeper into there. I think when it comes to insurance, you have to have like one single entity to kind of like provide the insurance, right? Otherwise, we could just go back to, I don't know, like how insurance was born, where every participant kind of like pitch into the same pool, and then when anything that catastrophically happens, we just kind of like pay out from that pool. I think if we have to do it in a decentralized way, that possibly would have to be the way, but there are no research around it so far. But I think that's a really solid and good point, especially when as you said, when there are going to be large institutions, a large sum of ETH coming in. I don't think any single provider could kind of cover a whole stake ETF. So that has to be done. But we will probably want to look into this after this talk. But yeah, let's speak.
If I can just add something, I think part of the complication there is due to basically how the Ethereum staking penalty dynamics work, right? So it's very difficult to ensure like validators because of the potential maximum downside. And the potential maximum downside is something that is like completely just governed by the consensus rules of Ethereum. I'm not saying that they should change necessarily. I just think that this is the thing that makes it very, very difficult to find like a sane price equilibrium for purchasing staking insurance. So if you look at like a lot of liquid staking solutions that offer insurance, there's like fine print that basically says like they'll insure the first 2 ETH of each validator up to a certain amount or something like that, right? It's basically impossible to insure the full amount of a validator against a mass slashing event, especially because you're not necessarily able to attribute like the cause there, right? So if there's some sort of catastrophic client bug, which is why we do things with like, decentralization and client diversity to avoid and mitigate the potential likelihood of things like that happening. But if something like that happens, then there's not enough ETH in the world in general to be able to create a policy that would cover that kind of event.
100%. I mean, totally agree with that. I think in order to build on this, because obviously this is one path to take, like a full coverage on insurance is obviously the easiest path to take, but the hardest to achieve. At the same time, you also mentioned about like having more clients, client diversification, more different people, entities to run the same thing. So I guess this would lead back to CSM, right? How do you see CSM along with DVT and solo stakers?
Yeah, so the primary purpose of CSM, I guess, as a module to Lido, is to enfranchise independent node operators or solo stakers into the protocol. So up until now, it's been a protocol mostly for professional node organizations that changed with simple DVT, but with CSM, I mean, I'm already running validators on CSM. I was also running solo validators before, but anybody, like if you have 2 ETH on testnet, you can go and you can set up a CSM validator. You can run it any way that you want. And if you want to run DVT on top of it, you can. The cool thing about CSM is that, like, yes, there's a bond, but basically the rewards that you get are multiplied because there's a lot of delegated capital that you also get rewards on. So you put in 2 ETH, that ETH gets transformed into STETH, and so you get normal staking rewards, and then you get 7% on testnet. Like, these numbers will probably change when the DAO does the vote for mainnet, but you would get 7% of rewards on the delegated capital. That's more than you would get, for example, in the curated set. So there's actually an incentive for node operators like P2P and A41 to go to CSM and run nodes, right? And we think it's very, very likely that once CSM becomes fully permissionless, professional node operators will also use it because they get better rewards on their ETH. And it's also a way for them to actually start like chasing capital now. So previously in the curated set, like the Lido network basically provided all of the cost of acquisition for capital because it just delegated stake to operators. But now operators will need some form of bond, so they might get that from investors or fund allocators or something like that. Now, given that we think that it's pretty lucrative for professional node operators to use CSM. Like, how do we protect, if you want to think about it that way, solo stakers? There's going to be an early access period. We don't know exactly how long it'll be, but probably on the order of like a few months, whereby if you've participated in CSM on testnet or you were a proven solo staker, you will be able to access CSM before the gates open. And we see kind of like how the market decides and how many node operators are going to participate and things like that. CSM will work similar to simple DVT in that it'll start with like a smaller target share. But we think that CSM can turn into like a really, really sustainable module. So it might go to 10%, it might go to 15%. There might be some protocol economic changes necessary for that to happen, because obviously like if the curated set is paying node operators 5% and CSM is 7%, like that doesn't work. That'll also impact margins. But there's going to be some community discussion around figuring out how to make that more appealing.
100%. I mean, the CSM thing is definitely something for, it's very good for the solo sector, especially for the ones that we spoke with. So looking forward to that. That is very interesting. And also wanted to understand more on, obviously you also mentioned about how DVT and CSM can actually be very good for node operators, but at the same time you guys did not really advertise it this way, right? I mean, on Twitter you basically only mentioned like Lido SSV. I think if not even Lido DVT, right? And at the same time, A41, like have you guys been like kind of advertising DVT to your clients, or if you guys have, like how would you kind of like communicate a message to them?
I know it's being recorded right now, so okay. Disclaimer here. I think we are investor to Obel, and we have close ties with SSV team. I don't know whether I should just call him Matthias or SSV, but because we do have okay. So I think we're a little different in terms of how we approached the idea of DVT from the get-go, from players like P2P. There are multiple assumptions that goes into it. First assumption is that when we first started off, we were like, hey, in order to get to the players like P2P level, we have to try something new, right? And as a newbie validator who was applying to Lido at the time, in order to become a curated node operator, there were not that many differentiators that we could have. So we intentionally chose, I'm sorry, bro. We intentionally chose diversity of clients as one of our tools, adding on top of our geographical, like, uniqueness. And we also added like early phase participants of every like DVT testnets as one of our tools as well. So on that end, were we advertising DVT to our clients? Not really, but we were intentionally using it in order to get to the center of gravity of the space, right? That is more realistic and very honest answer. But would we be using it as advertisement for potential clients or future clients? Could be yes. There's an episode that I had with Brad from Mobile. We were talking about it, and also I think Gauntlet was part of the discussion as well. We were talking about how, like, I think it was a private dinner at one of the events that we were throwing at ECC or whatever, right, or Texas or Denver. We talked about like potentially how we could propose or dumb down how ETH. Even though we believe that e-staking is not really risky at all, some of the clients that we talk to or potential clients we talk to just don't understand the idea of staking at all. And from their end, like liquid staking is something like this, just bombing in their, like, detonating their minds. So we were thinking about like, hey, like can Gauntlet like introduce or propose like or write down like some sort of a dumbed down material to the potential institutional clients, saying that DVT could be used to minimize or mitigate the risks that are involved in the staking, so that you can just safely stake with multiple or very few number of, I mean, the DVT is not created to do that, but few number of operators that are at the professional level, and also very curated like node operator sets that provides like those like very specific like staking products was once like addressed during the dinner, it was never like made like into a business idea, so I can freely say it. But I think those were the ideas that I also presented to certain life insurance companies and certain bigger LP type of or fund of funds like type of like players. Whenever I have I had a meeting with like those fund managers, I always brought up like hey, there's an idea like called staking, and that's what we do as a job. And if you're too worried, we can like also implement the idea of DVT. And if you're worried about just using like one single node operator in Korea, like A41, we could add like players from one from North America, one from like Europe, one from like Latin America, or like another one from Southeast Asia, and then like create a cluster and then like do a staking product. Was one of the ideas that we've suggested, or like that could be a global dispersed node operator sets. Another idea was like more of like top operator sets, like P2P, A41, yada yada. I don't want to name others, but like so compose like 4 and then like present it as like a financial product could be one of the ways that we like. I actually like were proposing this idea like in earlier days of 2024. Nothing was made into a concrete like business idea, but like I think if we were to advertise, I think as a node operator, that would be the way ahead for how we are going to sales with DVT, like assuming DVT won't go away.
I think that's a really good summary as well. This is like, I don't speak for P2P obviously, but that is also the angle that we wanted to look into as well. It's just that there are some kind of like this and that we need to figure out in terms of like as we just kind of went through, right? Like insurance, like who's liable for it, or like how do we actually define the liabilities when there's something catastrophic happens. But yeah, this is definitely something that we would love to explore as well after the talk. And I guess we don't have much time. I think we will just ask one last question and sum it up. And I think that there's a lot of questions that I would like to ask, and I guess the audience would like to know. But I think we have the Patera upgrade soon. So I think this really affects on how validators work, right? Because the 32 ETH thing would be not like removed, but like at least like different. And with DVT, I think that would allow more decentralization while probably bring down the numbers of validators. What do you guys think about it? I think that could be the last question.
Yeah. So there's two big things happening in Pectra that will affect like all staking solutions. So one is triggerable exits. It's basically the ability for the execution layer to trigger the exit of a validator on the consensus layer through like a special message, which wasn't possible before. It's very important from a security perspective of protocols, especially when you have permissionless entry elements, like you would like you do in Rocket Pool, or we will with CSM, to prevent like a problem of freeloading operators or malicious operators or things like that. And the other thing is what you mentioned, which is basically the proposed change to the maximum effective balance of a validator. So the idea is that currently the minimum and the maximum value of a validator are 32 ETH, but the minimum will become 32, and then 2048 will be the maximum. So the main purpose of this, as you mentioned, is to try to consolidate the number of active validators on the network, because right now they're creating too much burden on the peer-to-peer network. And so it'll decrease latency, it'll decrease the amount of actors on the network, and it'll allow the Ethereum developers to work on stuff like single slot finality and things like that. From a node operator perspective and from a staking protocol perspective, to be honest, it's pretty scary, because previously you might have like one validator that'll get slashed and it's just 32 ETH, and now you have a validator of 2048 ETH that might get slashed. And I think that's been taken into account, and so like the slashing mechanics, or at least the curve, is something that has been discussed to be potentially be altered as a part of Pectra. It's not fully finalized yet exactly. And DVT can actually help here because it reduces the likelihood of a slashing happening, right? So if you have one operator making one mistake, then a slashing can happen. If you have one operator making one mistake in a DVT cluster of like 4 or 5 or 7, that mistake cannot lead to a slashing. Unless the DVT software isn't like correctly written, and we've seen something on testnet, not in OBL or SSV, where something like that has happened. So DVT can definitely help something like that. On the other hand, I think we will see actually less savings on costs from node operators than we would expect. And like, why will this happen? So you're thinking, I'm running, let's say, 100 validators right now on an instance of 32. I'll just run 100 validators of 2048. Well, you're not going to do that, or I'll get really mad at you, because that's a lot more like ETH at stake if something happens to that machine. Like if that machine goes offline, and previously you had 100 times 32 ETH worth of value on that, like that is literally like 64 times lower than if you had 100 validators of 2048 ETH on there. So node operators do sizing of clusters based on what we call like blast radius minimization. If something blows up, how do you limit the impact? So while we will reduce the total amount of validators on the network, we will actually increase the amount of nodes on the network, because you will need to be running more beacon nodes and execution layer nodes with more clients, because now you're going to be running like more validator clients, but less validators, like the keys. So that's something like an interesting side effect of this push. In general, it's not bad for the network to have more nodes, but you will have more busyness, I guess, and congestion on the beacon node side and on the execution layer side now. And that's something that will be really interesting to monitor to see how it affects network dynamics.
I'll try to keep it short. I'm pretty sure our CTO is listening to our panel, and I'm pretty confident that the whole tech team is actually preparing for Pectra. I'll speak a little bit from a different angle here. Like usually I do a lot of treasury management these days and just focus on like investment and like, you know, these type of like organization these days, organization stuff. So like on Pectra, I'll be honest, like I'm not too like deeply involved. It's my CTO's job. But there are two things like that I see from an operator's like leads perspective. Like, you know, whenever there is like a huge upgrade that is announced, there are two things that just follow it naturally too. One is like it's definitely going to get delayed, so it's going to give us ample time to prepare. The second thing is like it's usually like the consequences or the consequences of the upgrade will be addressed at the very last minute, like at the very last minute of the upgrade. So like it will give us like the mind share of everybody, because we rarely do it together, right? I mean, in the usual business days, we rarely talk about those kind of stuff. We're just like, we just meet and we say hi, like Izzy, I love you, like. But like when those times come, we actually do start talking about that, like as a whole, like group of collective mind, like all these like 37 like, you know, collective like, you know, node operators at least. So I'm expecting like, you know, there will be a breakthrough, like, you know, on all these like small and big issues. Even the collateral like coming from 32 to 2,000 something ETH is like something that we're like not so sure, to be honest. We feel like the number could be adjusted, but we'll see.
If you wanted to get adjusted, start writing on the ETH research forums now.
I mean, these days ETH forums is too diversified in too many strands of the discussions. We don't want to be part of it, but I think we'll definitely like participate in it. Yeah.
All right. Liking the attitude and liking how we could just kind of look into these upgrades in a collective mind. That's the spirit of it. And okay, so I guess our time is due. Do we have any like closing notes?
I think we will have like a bunch of like, you know, staking and liquid restaking like panels on and on and on. I hope like I think we should probably give the turn to others. I mean, you guys will probably do like one or two more. I don't know, but okay.
Then I guess we could wrap it up, and thank you so much.